around too. I apologize for making you have to deal with me again. Stomp is not here.
Thanks, Mike. I have been joking with people today. I've been claiming that you guys say there were audio problems, but it was just that I was such a great guest. You wanted me back again this fast. So here I am.
That's true. That is true. We did enjoy talking with you, but we had it happens sometimes. Like we have these technical issues sometimes, and for the audience, it's wondering what happened. So we had originally done like a 2-hour podcast, and Stomp was trying to work on doing the edit. The first 90 minutes were fine, but sometimes we use this platform called Squadcast, and sometimes Squadcast, if there's an internet connectivity issue, then the audio does tend to get messed up. Typically, they're pretty good at recovering things on the cloud, but this time it was just too many holes in the audio between myself and Andy. So we're back with part 2. So thanks again. And Stomp was like freaking out. We were texting each other at like 10:30, 11 o'clock last night. So what we basically decided is we were going to put out part 1. I'm just going to connect with Andy on part 2. Stomp is like doing snowmobile touring, I think, for the next like few days. So he's 100% busy, and he's not going to be joining us tonight. So it's just the two of us, Andy.
Do we at least get Stomp's cat?
We don't. There's no cat, and I don't have a cat either. So your cat is the executive producer tonight.
Great.
Yep.
I'll wake her up.
Yeah, but you know, the good thing about having part 2 is that we dropped the part 1, and then I had a bunch of people coming out of the woodwork feeding me information about you. So I got your trail name, and I think it actually is a good trail name that connects with what just happened. So your trail name is Plan B, which I think makes sense, right?
So there's a story that this is a potential trail name that we absolutely have to explain, because there are sort of multiple interpretations of what that could possibly mean.
Okay. So I guess so the Zima guy is the one that tipped me off about this. So
that's
I don't know if you want to explain it, but
I'm going to get him. He was unhappy in a joking way that I used his last name and attached it to Zima. So he was also concerned about the beer that I had with me last time, and it wasn't appropriate. So he came by my house today and dropped off 4 different beers for me. So, but I guess that's later, and I should go back to the trail name issue and explain. Is that?
Yeah. No, we'll do trail name, and then you can tell me what beer you're drinking. But so Plan B, like that makes sense to me. Like so I'm always nervous when this stuff happens. Occasionally, we'll go back to a guest to say like, hey, there's an audio issue. Can we re-record? I think we had to re-record one episode with Rebecca in the past, but you were very chill about it, and I was like, oh, thank God. So then I heard that your trail name was Plan B, and I was like, that makes sense, because she's always, figures like she's going to roll with the punches. But explain to me what it means.
So I do a lot of trip planning, whether it's backpacking trips, kayaking trips, biking trips, whatever. I plan a ton of them. And my friends who go along will sometimes, not shockingly, throw wrenches into the plan. Things happen. Somebody can't make it and they were supposed to shuttle, or somebody needs to leave early. We need to get out, or, something always seems to happen, best laid plans. And so it's never a problem, because I always have a plan B, and there's always a way to just figure it out and deal with whatever comes up. So we roll from there. And so Dave likes to say that that's my trail name. And he especially likes it when there is a problem and I say, oh, but here's how we can do it instead. And he nods his head and says, yes, Plan B. But the discomfort with Plan B as a trail name is that Plan B is a certain medication.
Yeah.
And so, and this is not about people that use that. That's a whole, everybody do your thing. But I was once in a situation where someone referred to me as Plan B, and someone else said, oh my God, that's a very personal thing. I can't believe you'd bring that up. And the person hearing it didn't understand that it was this trail name. They thought it was a reference to something in my personal life. So it was a little awkward there for a second. But I thought you actually were going to have, I don't officially have a trail name. I thought you were going to bring up the other trail name from the YGT crew.
No, I can't even remember that one, honestly. But so when you were on the AT, you did like a little section of the AT, but you didn't get a trail name. Correct. When you were on there?
Correct. So there have been a lot of proposals for Siri or Alexa, just because with the planning I do, anytime I go somewhere, people are asking me questions, and I'm always giving answers about things. And so Siri or Alexa have been proposed, Plan B, and then um, TBA.
Okay. All right. Well, that that makes sense. But anyway, it was good that people were coming out of the woodwork, and I think I was listening to the last part of part one, and I think that we had wrapped up with you sort of talking about how you had crowdsourced and assisted with that sort of large scale rescue, and then we wanted to keep on with the search and rescue theme. You had actually broken your leg out on the trail, so I think we were going to start with that story for you to sort of talk about. So obviously we talk a lot about search and rescue, and I think the difference, from what I can tell with the way you were describing sort of like the episode where you had helped organize that search and rescue, is it sounds like the local law enforcement is a lot more sort of involved in the ground searching as well, but they'll defer to, it doesn't sound like there's like a heavy formal structured volunteer organization. It sounds like they'll tap into your group if they need to, which is a little bit different than New Hampshire, where we have these established volunteer groups, and they basically just sit there and Fish and Game can activate them whenever they need a carry out or whatever. But in your situation, like you were pretty close to the trailhead, is that right, or were you far in?
I know I was thankfully very, very close. I was close enough that where it happened, the trail opened up into this small clearing, and then just above that was a field where we had left our vehicles for that end after the trip was over. And so we were actually able to back my Jeep. I mean, I didn't, clearly, I say we, but my friends were able to back my Jeep down pretty close to me. And so we got me out. And then it took an hour for an ambulance to get there once the call was actually made.
Okay. And I'm curious because I've never experienced a lower leg injury. I think, like, I've been out on trail and I do a lot of solo hiking and I go in deep into the wilderness, and I've had these scenarios where I've gone hard on my ankle and just sort of like had a scare, but I'm sure you've had this too, where you'll do a deep sort of like ankle twist, and then you'll sit there and be like, oh my God, is this serious or is it just going to go away? And I've been lucky where it's kind of gone away. But from your perspective, like, you had a full break, how realistic would it have been if you were by yourself to like either like stabilize that injury or sort of crawl out to get back to where you were?
I definitely could have stabilized it. Crawling would have been a little difficult. So with the break that I had, I broke my tib and fib both, down near my ankle, also tore a ligament off the bottom of my fib. When I fell, my foot was actually facing the wrong direction.
Okay.
I picked up my leg to realign it, and when I picked up my leg, it was one of those things where my foot sort of swung because there was no bone structure connecting. So even if I stabilized it really well, in terms of crawling, I would have had to been on my knee and keeping my ankle up, and I just don't know with that sort of injury that would have worked for me. I mean, I definitely could not have done it for very far.
Got it. So you're lucky you had people there and you were close to the trailhead, but it would have been ugly if you were far in.
Well, if I was far in, I would have pushed my button on my Garmin. I would have hit the
Got it.
SOS button.
Got
Yeah.
it. And
And in,
then,
and in fact,
oh,
oh,
sorry, go
when
ahead.
I did fall, part of what I was thinking over and what I talked to my friends about was, should I hit the button? Because we knew there wasn't self-service where we were. We were about a 15-minute drive from self-service. So it was a question of, do I hit the button or do we send someone to drive to call 911 once they got service? And they let me make the decision. And my decision was send someone to drive, because if I hit that Garmin SOS button, it has to go up to Garmin satellite. They have to try to connect with the local authorities. I just felt like it would probably be faster, more immediate response, easier response if it was just a 911 call placed directly to the local system. So that's what we did.
Great. Yeah. And how big of a crew arrived when they had to get there? They brought an ambulance and got you in there?
So we got up to the top of the road in my Jeep because we didn't think an ambulance could come down. And we sat there, like I said, it took an hour after the phone call was made. And so while we were there, a Forest Service ranger did arrive. And in fact, it was sort of funny. My friend came up to my car window and she said, "There's a ranger here. He's coming over." And she's like, and he's just your type. And she kind of laughed and then, took off. And he walked up and I will say he sure enough was my type. And so he had stuff with him. He checked my blood pressure and just kind of monitor my vitals. And so then he had to call and cancel. They had a carry out crew coming. They thought they had a carry out from the trail. So I don't know how many people he had coming. I know he mentioned it was at least six. So he had to call them off once he realized that I was actually out. So then he hung with me until the paramedics arrived.
Great. And then a couple months recovery for that?
So I did it at the end of June, surgery the first couple days in July. My doctor had told me I probably wouldn't be able to hike until November, and I just had a ridiculously fast, fantastic recovery. I was ready to hike by about mid-September, and he made me wait. He felt like it wasn't strong enough yet, and I started hiking, end of September, early October, and by the end of October, I had a 10-miler in. So I was really happy with how fast I recovered with that.
All right, that's not bad. It's my biggest nightmare is like not being able to get outside or do run or I hike pretty much
Yes.
every weekend, but it would be a total nightmare. Were you able to keep yourself occupied even though you weren't able to get out and run
I
around?
did. I mean, I was working and stuff, and then I ended up actually it was made me sad, but I planned a lot of trips. I just never went. I didn't get to go. So I would plan logistics and things on kayaking trips and backpacking trips, and I'd hand it over to my friends, and they'd go out and have fun. So it was, that part was kind of a bummer, but I'd rather, it kind of kept me connected to them and what they were out doing.
That's nice. And
So
so one of the things that like I've noticed and is different than me because I'm mostly a loner. Although I am hiking tomorrow with a group of new friends, which is different for me. But you're super social and as a leader of like a big social media group, like it seems like you're always organizing events. Like you had, we've been talking about these Hallmark movies, and I know that you had. Organize like a big friend group with the to watch the Hallmark movie, and then you're always doing the sort of the cycling and kayaking, backpacking stuff. Can you talk a little bit? Like, have you always been that way, or have you always been super social and being like the organizer?
so so I'm my personality type, and I've done some testing and disc assessments and intrinsic and different things. I'm kind of an extroverted introvert. So I like to plan things. I'm sort of a service-oriented personality. I like to plan things. I like to get people together. But while it's happening, I'm never right in the middle of it. I'm not comfortable being right in the middle of it. I'm more kind of on the fringe, sort of watching it happen, facilitating it happening. And so I am social, but being around a lot of people like that, like many introverts, is exhausting for me. So I'm often pretty glad to climb into my tent at the end of the night because I have some like alone space and that's how I recharge. So I do that stuff and I like it and I always have, but I've never been like I don't want to be the front and center of attention. That's just not my thing and not my style. So
Got it. Well, how was what we're talking about for the listeners, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, but there was the Hall. I'm still working on my Hallmark movie script, but the Hallmark movie for the Glacier National Park, like I think it was Lovin' Glacier National. Um, how many people came over? Would you have you had like a slumber party for that, right?
So we had to keep it smaller than the normal bigger crew just because we were sitting down to watch something on TV rather than having a party kind of thing. So we had about 13. And the week before, my friend Dean, who is from New Zealand, and people who were on the AT, I think he through hiked in 2019, may know him, Sherpa and his dog Blue. And Dean sent a message and said, "Hey, I know that Americans typically watch Hallmark movies in their pajamas, so I'm wearing my pajamas." And then it was game on, right? Like that had to happen. So many people went shopping to buy pajamas. So lots of people at my house changing into pajamas as soon as they arrived. So we had kind of this PJ party. Everybody brought, food and snacks and alcohol, and we had a bingo game and we had a drinking game, and we were kind of loud enough that we had to turn the captions on for the movie. We'd be arguing over whether something qualified for a bingo square or not, and just silliness like that. And we were all, I think, very surprised because we ended up having a great time. The movie was horrible. I mean, even worse
Yes.
than the Christmas, the Hallmark Christmas movies.
What do
It
you mean
was
worse? I
bad.
love the Hallmark Christmas movies.
It was so bad. I mean, we spent a lot of time ridiculing it, and we really liked the dogs. We really liked the daughter, but the rest of the
Yep.
characters, nobody liked. Nobody liked the actors and actresses. It was just bad. They set the stage at the very beginning when the opening credits really kind of looked like a word art thing.
Hmm.
And then the first thing they did was mention Rocky Mountain Glacier National Park. And then it was just game on for ripping it up. We had a lot of fun,
Yeah, yeah, that's good. I actually, I mean, I like the scenery out there. I definitely want to get out there, but yeah,
for
it
sure.
wasn't the most, even, yeah, it was definitely a made for TV movie, which
Yes. Yes.
is good. And
So
then
we
the other thing, just keeping with the movie theme here. So we talked about this movie Cocaine Bear that's coming out. Like, and for the
mhm.
listeners, as a reminder, this movie is like I think it's a campy horror story about a bear that gets a hold of some clandestine drugs that are found in the woods and then terrorizes a town. And I'm sure that it's going to be, the production value is probably going to be a little bit better than the Hallmark movie, but not much. But you're getting together for that one too?
we are. And did you know it's based on a true story?
Yes, yeah, we talked about
Yes.
it a
Yeah,
couple of
so
episodes
we
ago.
we are getting together, but we all understand that there will be a much bigger demand for that than just the 13 of us who were there. And so there are already a whole lot of people saying they want to go. So we're renting a theater.
Okay.
So yeah, if we rent a theater and pack it with our friends crew, we can talk back to the screen if we want. We can be obnoxious if we want. Nobody else is in there. Do it at a theater where you can have beer, and yeah. So that's our grand plan, is to watch Cocaine Bear and enjoy all the stupidity of it. So
That'll be good. And then with the group dynamics that you have, whether it's through the Facebook hiking group or whatever, I can't remember if this made the cut or last time. I don't think I think we ended up cutting this out, but I asked you about this previously. Like, what's the deal with like dating drama? Do you have to ever intervene in like people breaking up or like getting kicked out of the group because they're being too
Mhm.
out of control?
So there have been some interesting things. We actually have a marriage in the group. We have two people that
Okay.
met in the group and got married, so that's fun. They're both fantastic. I was thrilled to see them get together and then get married. And we have had a couple situations where, go on a group trip and somebody's sort of behaving questionably, and they don't come out again. They're gone. I disappear them from our lives. And we would occasionally have issues in the group itself, more when it first started, where a woman would post about a hike, and it happened to multiple women, and then they would tell me that as soon as they posted it, they started getting DMs from men in the group. Hey, do you want to hike? Can we talk about this place you went? And I basically sort of went out publicly and said, look, here's how this works, gentlemen. This is not how it's going to happen here. There were women telling me they didn't want to post about hikes in the group anymore. So we had to clarify that. And really, it's not been much of a problem. It's just the tone in the group is very different than most Facebook groups. We militantly enforce the be nice rule, and I'm pretty protective of group members. So at the first sign of anything untoward or creepy or weird, I just shut it down fast, and that person doesn't stay around very long.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I've seen groups be moderated in a million different ways, but I think for your group, for the purpose of what it's there for, it makes a lot of sense. And then as far as the educational stuff that you get involved with in the group, so you do offer this beginning backpacking program for group members. Before we get into the details of the curriculum of the backpacking piece of it, like I always sort of say this about like people that are learning to hike, if they're looking to do winter hiking or backpacking or anything like that, like one of the things I always recommend is like if you're not sure where to start, I always tell people to start with considering hiring a guide. Like in New Hampshire we have a couple of really good guide services. You can also work with organizations like we have the AMC in our area where you can you can basically pay to go on hiking excursions to learn. But more and more, we're starting to see, like, meetup groups have always been a thing. But no, more and more, we're starting to see different social media groups that are offering these beginner programs. And I think we've talked about sort of some of the right ways to do it and some of the wrong ways to do it in various episodes. I think your program is very, on that side of the right way to do it. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the curriculum and what you offer for beginning backpacking?
Sure. So first, it's all free. And I want to be clear about that because we're going to be talking about things we do on the National Forest land, and you need permits and insurance and all sorts of things if you're running a business, and that's not what we're doing. We have we schedule a weekend for the trip, and in the months leading up to that, we have a series of Zooms with panels of experienced backpackers, and there are almost 40 experienced backpackers who volunteer their time to make this happen. And so we do 4 Zooms on any kind of gear you could even think about taking backpacking. We cover it and we talk about pros and cons and features and what we recommend they take and what they don't need, like a hatchet or a machete. Those show up occasionally. So we go through, everything about gear. We talk, we also similarly walk through clothing. We have 2 Zooms that we do that are how to's, and that's everything from how to dig a cat hole, bear handling for food, kind of, that safe food handling, how to use your filters, how to start a fire, how to layer, how to make sure you don't get, sweaty if you have layers you can take off, just all those sorts of things that a beginner backpacker may not know about. And we have a Zoom on women's hygiene because a lot of our women that sign up for the trip have a lot of questions about that. It's just different than for the guys. And then we have one that is required, and it's an outdoor first aid session. And the gentleman that teaches it is, certified and teaches wilderness first aid and other classes. So he spends about 90 minutes giving us enough that they have some education, they know things to look out for. So that's sort of the base of it. We also do pieces on leave no trace. We emphasize L&T quite a lot. We don't teach compass use and map use. We refer them to the Columbia River Orienteering Club's 18-part YouTube series. They have an amazing series, and we could not do anything better than what they do. So we refer people to that and tell them to watch it. And then along the way, they're doing hikes, getting in hiking time. And we tell them before the class or before the actual trip weekend, that they need to have done a 7-mile hike with their full pack on a trail rated moderate or above. And that, if they do that, we know they're ready for our trip. Our trips are usually 5 miles or fewer per day. The emphasis is on backpacking skills rather than hiking skills. So we want to teach them what they need to know to backpack, not beat them to death with, 10, 12, 14-mile trip. And we do have at least one trip every time that's about 7 miles, just because we've had requests from some stronger hikers that want to go a little farther than 5 miles, but they select their trips themselves. So if they're more of a 3-mile person, they're not going to end up stuck in the 7-mile a day trip. So that's sort of
Got it.
the rough.
Yeah, and then as far as sort of common things that you notice, like I've had like people that I've talked to about backpacking and trying to get, you know, beginners going, and not at a big scale, like just friends of mine. And I just think back to my experience too, and I think some of the things that I used to do that caused me some headache was like I brought way too much food, I carried too much water, didn't rely on a filter. I think I brought probably too many clothes that I didn't need. My first aid kit was like out of control. Like, do you still see those same sort of tendencies in people even after they've gone through the program? Just, do you take the approach where like it's better for them to sort of be heavy and then slowly pare their weight down, or do you give them advice ahead of time to say like don't carry that much weight?
Right. So what you described is really what all beginners tend to do. My first trip, my pack was about 40 pounds. So I mean, and that's pretty normal. So we see along the way that they begin to realize they don't need as much as they thought. Along the way, meaning in the training. So, for example, when we talk about clothing and we talk about wearing the same clothes both days in a row, you can see some horrified looks, and we just, trust us. This is okay, and so we try to beat that out of them a little bit along the way, and we are fairly successful when they show up. The packs tend to be, because we will often weigh their packs at the trailheads that morning. They typically run 28 to 32 pounds, which for beginners, that's solid. That's not too bad. We can
Yeah.
still pull some things out. Trailhead mornings, we've pulled out machetes, we've pulled out lots of clothes, we've pulled out, somebody carrying giant coils of rope. I mean, so you still do get some stuff, but it seems to be, as everyone says, you pack your fears. So it does seem to be fear based. And we don't make them take the things out of their pack. We go through it, we recommend things. But ultimately, if someone feels like they need to have a 20-foot coil of heavy rope, well, that's their choice. So, we educate them, but we don't force them to do, to leave things behind if they really feel like they need that to be comfortable.
Got it. And then this is an extended program. So how many months does it, like, how long from the time that they start doing the Zoom classes to the time they actually get out and do the
Right.
group hike? How long does that take?
So this year the class is in mid-April, and we started with the first on January 31st.
All
So
right.
it's,
So then that would
three
serve, I
months.
think, to sort of like make sure that they're really committed by the time April rolls around. Like if they've gone to the Zooms, then they're probably going to show up in April if they go to multiple training sessions,
Correct.
I would guess.
And they don't all go on the trips. And some people will tell you from the beginning, I'm not in a position to get my hands on backpacking gear. I'm just here to learn. Or maybe they know they have a conflict that weekend, but they want to learn. So we typically will have 125 or so beginners in the group each time. And then we usually take 25 to 35 out on trips. So by far, not all of them go. At this point, we've trained about 700 beginners, and we've taken about 125 to 50 out on their first trips.
Yeah. Do you see like a standard? Like, I always joke around like hiking's like, for me, hiking was like the last stop on my athletic activity. Basically, like I did wrestling and running all through my younger years, and then it became mostly cardio, and then eventually now I'm doing hiking. So that's the end of my sort of athletic. And you typically will get people in their 30s and 40s and 50s that get into it. Like, do you still see that profile, or is it young people that are showing up as well?
No, it actually skews a little bit older than that. So a lot, I mean, we have all ages coming from mid 20s up to 70s. I would say the bulk of our participants tend to be women who are 45 to 65. And a lot of them are people who their kids are now out of the house and they've got time for themselves and they're trying to do some new things, or people who maybe hiked or backpacked when they were younger and then had families and just it didn't fit in the schedule and routine. And so now they're trying to get back to it. Sometimes they have, kids or grandkids that want to do it and they're trying to learn to help them. And so but there's a fair amount of anxiety for many of them around getting out there. And with gear choices and things, it can be overwhelming. If you're just starting, you need all these different pieces of gear. What's best, what's not, what do you need, how do you use it? There's just a lot to try to figure out. And so the program really makes a difference for them. And one of the really cool things about it with anybody going is that they're so excited. I mean, it sort of takes you back to the first time you went backpacking, because you were excited, you were kind of hyped up to do this thing, and now to see them do it, it's like you get to do it all over again for the first time. And so it's fun, and that's why our experienced backpackers love it so much and always want to do it. And then the other piece of it is that when you start the program, they're commenting, they're asking questions, and they're coming out and saying, I don't know if I can do this. I want to do this, but I'm just not sure. And, when you see them come off trail at the end of their trip, almost every single person is walking differently than when they started the trip. And I don't mean they're limping with blisters and things, but just they're walking with a different confidence than when you started the trip the day before when they were nervous. And so it's just a really, really cool thing to see. And every time I'm with a group and we come off trail, I get off trail first intentionally so I can stand and take like trip ending pictures as each of them come through. And it's all I could do not to tear up, because I mean, they're just so much, they're so excited and proud and like I said, just carrying themselves differently. So it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
there's something to be said about just a new experience, and I think even it's such a continuous thing. Like you'll never get to the point where, I mean, maybe you do eventually get to the point. Like if you're doing these through hikes and stuff, like some of these people that do the multiple ones, I'm sure that they get to the point where they're like, I know everything I need to know, and I've got everything dialed in. But like even me, like this year was the first year that I really did hammock camping, and like it was, I had a little bit of anxiety. I'm like, all right, how do I run my ridge line? How am I going to hang my tarp and make sure that my I've got the trees that are the right length for me, and it took a little bit of time, but it sort of brings you back, and you'll be like, oh, I remember I used to feel like this when I had to pitch my tent, and now, it's a new thing. So I don't think anybody ever really gets to the point where they're finished learning this stuff. But I think the biggest thing is what you're talking about is like just doing it that first couple of times and getting over that hump, and then every new situation you run into, at least like, all right, I did it the first time and I slept outside overnight and I can do it again.
Right. And it's, you know, part of what's different and unusual for people doing the program is that sometimes they've signed up with a friend or a family member and they come in pairs, but most of the time they're coming by themselves. And so understand that they are going to an area with no cell service to meet internet strangers to go in the woods overnight. And so, there's also sort of that social anxiety of, am I going to fit in? Are people going to like me? Am I going to find people that I can talk to? Is this okay? And they've gotten over some of that just because in the group with doing the Zooms and seeing the panels of experienced backpackers, they sort of feel like they've gotten to know, we call them EBs. They're EBs, the experienced, and BBs, the beginners. So I think they feel like they've gotten to know the EBs a little bit. And then before the trip, once they select their trips, because we do have 5 to 7 trips happening that weekend on different parts of the trail because we have to keep the group sizes small. And so we assign the EBs to each group, and then they're all kind of chatting. Sometimes they're Zooming. And so they know who they're going with, they know who their EBs are. They remember seeing that EB on a panel or something. And so it's not a complete mystery who the people are, but there's still some social anxiety around things as well as it's my first backpacking trip anxiety.
Yeah, it makes sense, and it's nice to hear that like there is older people that are getting involved in this, but it's also sort of, I pulled an article actually as I was doing research to talk to you about this topic, and the article was basically talking about how young people today are not socializing as much, and that there's a lot of feelings of sort of loneliness and isolation. And there's all kinds of studies that talk about sort of the increase in anxiety and depression amongst younger people. And I do think that although my kids always joke about this, they're like, you'd totally be the dad that sends me off into like wilderness rehab or whatever, you know what I mean? But it would be nice to see an increase in young people, and I do think like, there's evidence in New Hampshire that we're seeing that, but it would be nice to see more young people sort of embracing outdoor activity and backpacking and things like that. And I think you see it on the AT, but I don't know how big of a scale it is compared to the, midlife people.
Well, one of the issues for us with the younger people is that we are based solely on Facebook, and that's not where they are.
Yeah.
And so we just don't have that many younger people in our group. And we've talked some, and we need to talk more about it, about how do we sort of branch out Instagram, Reddit. Of course, Reddit would be a huge way to connect with them. And, it's harder because they don't have those same event features and moderation features. And it's just, it's a different platform, obviously, and it's not set up as well to do what we do. And so we've talked about trying to build a presence, Reddit or Instagram, and trying to connect with some of the younger people because there are absolutely younger people out there backpacking. And I say younger, and I'm 50. I turned 50 this year, so I'm officially one of the olds. I think it makes me an old.
I'm the
I'm
same
certain.
age.
Yeah, my age and my side part make me one of the olds. So we are looking for some younger people, but we're not. They're not where we are. So it's going to be up to us to you know take it to where they are.
All right. So changing topic here. I'm a tourist and I'm going to hit Missouri. Where am I? What do you recommend as far as for first time visitors on the Ozark?
So to hike or just to visit Missouri generally?
I'd say both. Like if you say like,
Both.
okay, here's a couple of hikes I would recommend, and then here's a couple of like dumb tourist stuff that everybody has to do.
Sure. So you have to go to the Arch. I mean, there's no avoiding coming to Missouri and not going to the Arch. I mean, certainly people do because they're on
Hmm.
different sides of the state, but it is, I don't know if it's officially a national, I don't think it's a national park, but it's a national something. So you definitely
Monument,
need,
probably.
yeah, but it's more than the monument. I can't remember what they have it classified as, but you definitely need to visit the Arch. Um, if you're backpacking Missouri and you're an experienced backpacker, definitely need to go to the Tom Sock section of the OT. I mentioned in the last segment we did that it's very popular. It's gorgeous. Trail can be a little more challenging to follow in that area. It's a little tougher with some different climbs and things. And so I say climbs, I want to make air quotes with our climbs compared to yours, but for Missouri, there are tougher climbs there. So I would say that's a great place to be. Um, but highly recommend anybody coming to Missouri that likes outdoor activities to paddle. We have a lot of outfitters down south central Missouri. You you just, I mean, you can't beat paddling down a crystal clear stream and veering off and paddling into a cave and coming back out, and it's there's just some great stuff with our rivers, so that's another highlight as well. And of
Oh
course
yeah,
there's
and
Lake
then
of the Ozarks, Table Rock
oh
Lake.
yeah, yeah. And do you typically how many nights out will you do when you're on a kayak trip? Is it just mostly like a weekend thing, or can you do extended week long trips?
So it varies. With a job, it tends to be weekends. When I had my 3 years of happily unemployed time, I could go for 3 or 4 nights pretty easily. My problem was finding others to go because so many people were working. So it's not limited by ability to get out there and do it or knowing how to pack things like that. It's just about the time. So.
Okay. And I forgot to ask you, like, you want to plug your friend's beer that he gave you?
Oh, I should. I should. So, my friend Dave Burney, I have to make sure I mention his last name again.
Yep.
Dave, who I connected with Zima yesterday, stopped by my house today with some beers because he didn't like what I mentioned that I had to drink the other day. So, I have a Little Victories Tropical Ale. It's from Great Raft Brewing in Shreveport, Louisiana. He gave up one
Okay.
of his out of state beers for me, and it's a mango, pineapple, passion fruit, orange tropical ale. It's pretty
Oh,
good.
that sounds
So I
good.
yeah, I told him I generally like pale ales and sours and fruit beers, and so this was one that he brought over. So that's what I cracked open tonight.
Not bad. Well, I'm drinking a water because I'm getting up at 3:30 in the morning. So for the listeners in the Ozarks, the way it works here in New England is you've got a bunch of people that live in Massachusetts who are about 2 hours, 2.5 hours away from a lot of the cool trailheads. So I'm going to be meeting a couple of friends up in Twin Mountain, and we're going to be doing a 15-mile hike with probably, I would guess, at least 4 to 5,000 feet of elevation climb. So we're going to be doing a mountain range called the Twin, so North and South Twin, and then we're going to go over to Galehead, which is so we connect with the Appalachian Trail up by Franconia Ridge in that particular area there. So it's going to be a long day, but it's in pursuit of the 4,000 footer list for the winter season. So we have 4,000 footers that you can do any time of the year, and then you can do like a seasonal list and say like, all right, I'm going to climb all these mountains in the winter. So I'm drinking a water just because I got to go to bed right after this.
So can I do one more plug? May I do one more plug
Yeah,
for
go ahead.
so our Facebook group again, Ozark Trail Section Hikers and Backpackers, and it is probably the nicest, kindest place on the internet because we don't allow nonsense in there. I'm kind of militant about that, but
Yep.
it's very much a learning culture in there. And so we do daily discussion topics where I'll post a question about maybe a certain kind of gear and what people like, or how to do a certain thing and how people do it. And so even if you're not in the Ozarks, never going to be in the Ozarks, feel free to join us to learn and share information with others when they have questions. And then with the beginner backpacking program, it's a free program we do. You don't have to be able to go on the trip to join. So if somebody's interested in learning about backpacking and know they won't set foot in Missouri, that's okay. They can still come and listen to the Zooms and learn. And so we do have our class that's already started, so it's closed for now, but it's something we do every year. The trip is always in April, so it launches, sometime in January. We actually just finished our very first winter beginner backpacker geared toward Missouri winters. It would not get someone ready for winter in the Whites or winter in the Rockies or Smokies or something like that. It's based on our environment, but there's some good information in those things that we do, and it's open to anybody anywhere. We have members from all across the country.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm going to link. I'm going to do like a separate push on our Instagram and Facebook with the links to access the site, and I'll push those out tonight so people can join if they want. Question for you about the sort of question of the day. So for the listeners, Andy basically will put out, like, she'll put out like the most like obscure question. She'll be like, okay, let's talk about the the shovel that you use to dig your cat holes. What brands do you like? What, like, it gets down to that level.
What are your shoelaces?
She's like literally, and I've been in this group for like a few years now, and it's like, I don't know if it's every day, but it's like 3-4 times a week she's coming up with like a hiking related question. I don't think I've ever seen you do a repeat of a question. Like, do you have a spreadsheet where you just have questions, or is it just like come off the top of your head?
I've done repeats. So sometimes I sit and just stare at the screen trying to figure out, God, what can we've done, some of the more popular questions have been about, God, coffee. You mentioned, what are you doing for coffee? And we can get 200 responses. And so I have to struggle to come up with things or to really get into minutia to make something new out of something we sort of already talked about. Like with shoelaces, for example, we've talked about shoelaces. I've asked about lacing techniques. You get into the how-tos, and I've asked about other uses for shoelaces if you get in a bind. So we kind of drill into all sorts of things over time, and I definitely have repeated some things. Just, I think it's been long enough ago that people don't tend to remember, or they've joined the group in the last year and don't know I asked it 3 years ago. And it tends to be, I've seen some turnover of people who are super active and answering questions, and that changes too. So it's just interesting. But I definitely repeat. A few months ago, I posted and said, okay, I'm running out of material. Like, give me suggestions on things to ask about. And probably 3/4 of it was stuff that I'd already asked before, but I recycled it. So I just pulled off the top of my head every day.
Yeah, it is very helpful, and it's good. Another subject I wanted to just cover with you is sort of your traveling. So we talked a little bit about sort of your adventures on the AT, and you did like that. Would you do that first section, that first 30 miles or so?
Yeah, I did. We did the approach trail to Neil Gap. So
What did you think? Was it? I have this sort of, I have this idea in my head about what it's going to be like, but I don't know if it'll match like when I actually one of these days. I actually was thinking about like going down with my daughter at some point and just doing like maybe the first 100 miles or something like that to just check it out. But did it live up to your expectations? Was it not as exciting or interesting, or was it more interesting than you expected?
So the answer is it varies. It was super cool just to be on the AT, right? Because you see all the AT stuff, and then to see the Blood Mountain, the shelter that's up there was neat, and Neil Gap, and the trees and the shoes and all this stuff, and the approach trail and the lodge, and so that was all. It was cool to see all that. We had our pictures taken at the Arch, behind the visitor center, all the kind of touristy parts of the AT, the stuff that we did. Um, I was not a fan. The shelters, when we got to the shelters, my friends slept in the shelters. I slept in my tent. Again, I need that downtime. I want that time away. I wanted no part of sleeping in a shelter and not having any personal space. So that was not my thing, but I appreciated the camaraderie before bedtime. That was kind of fun. We ended up with a group of about 12 of us that hung together. And then, for me, I'm not the strongest hiker. I'm terrible at climbing. And so those climbs were very different than what I typically see in Missouri, and were tough for me. And also we started out, I think we were doing like 13 miles and 14 miles, and those were just too big of days for me with those climbs. You would breeze through it. They wouldn't be anything to you. They are not like what you're dealing with. But for me, they were a lot. my two friends, Jennifer and Dia, they did much better than I did with them because they're much stronger climbers. But yeah, it kicked my butt pretty good. So if I
Yeah,
did it
yeah.
again, I would be doing about 8 miles, starting out and building up if I did a
Yeah,
longer
and it's
hike.
interesting. Like geography plays into it so much because I remember like, and I do a lot of miles and a lot of elevation in the Northeast. But I remember going out to Arizona and like in August in the heat, and it was like I probably couldn't do more than 4 or 5 miles. And I would imagine you're dealing with a lot longer sort of a warmer season where you are than we deal with in the Northeast. So I would guess that like it would equal the playing field out in the Southwest. So it's all things are it
Yeah.
depends on what you're used to.
Well, and we have such humidity here in warm weather, and it's similar there in Georgia. So, that part you'd probably be that would, cause you trouble, but that was what we were accustomed to. Although it was interesting because, again, we don't have the elevation in Missouri to really feel the difference in the amount of humidity. But in Georgia, when you would be hiking down, into a valley or a gap, it would get more and more oppressive, and then as you were climbing out you could feel like the air felt like it was getting lighter, and then when you'd get up top and you'd manage to catch a breeze, it was just, I mean, I found myself really motivated to climb as fast as I could just to get back to cooler air and a breeze, because down in the gaps it was pretty miserable, or it was getting pretty warm our last couple days.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then aside from the AT, you've hiked in other areas of the country, and have you gone outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, so I did a day hike in Innsbruck, Austria. I've done a day hike in Belize, one in Mexico, just on trips and things. In the U.S., my hiking resume is actually pretty thin outside Missouri. I've hiked the Narrows at Zion. I'm trying to get a little better. So in October, I have a trip to Colorado. We're backpacking part of the Gore Range outside of Vail. And then actually, sorry, that's July. I am not hiking in Colorado in October. October is Big Bend. We're doing some hiking
Oh,
and some
nice.
backpacking in Big Bend. And then in May, I'm heading out to South Carolina. And on the way, I'm stopping and I'm hiking Mount LeConte. And then I may build in an extra day and do a hike to Clingman's Dome. I don't want to drive to Clingman's Dome because that feels like cheating. So I need to start, you know, several miles away and hike in and hike out.
All right. Well, it sounds like you got busy travel plans, so I'm impressed. I got to expand my horizons and get out of New England at some point, but it's just
Come out and visit.
I got to stick close to home right now. I got tuition to pay, I think, so
Oh yeah, yeah,
we'll
that'll
see.
do it.
Although my daughter's in North Carolina, so I do want to get out to like Asheville and look at that area a
Oh
little bit,
yeah,
but we'll see.
yeah.
We'll
We
see.
have a mutual friend in Asheville, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't been out there. My one of my coworkers used to live there, and she raves about it. So we'll see someday. But no,
It's
this was
beautiful.
good. I did want to wrap up with some rapid fire questions, and I think this is specifically for our little
Uh-oh.
friend group, and you got this. So I know we already went through these, but I actually switched them up a little bit. Some of them are the same, but
Oh no. Happy cheese, guys.
so yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I guess we can sort of talk about. So we're in this little group where there's a bunch of really experienced like through hikers and people that have done like the Triple Crown and stuff, and they all talk about sort of how cheese, particularly like warm 2 3 day old cheese that's sort of that sweaty gross cheese, is like the best thing to eat on the trail. So I don't do you do I bring cheese. I actually eat cheese a lot on overnight trips and on day trips. So or do you
I
just pose
absolutely
to
bring
pretend that you like cheese?
no, I absolutely take cheese on trips. And on
Yeah.
day hikes, I'll do like cheese sausage crackers, sort of thing. But my issue with cheese, not an issue, but my thinking with cheese is, I tend to do shorter trips, and sometimes I want the weight of it, sometimes I don't, just depending what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's usually the first thing I eat when I get hungry. So but the weight isn't a factor for too long. But anyway, so rapid fire here. So you are locked in a room for 24 hours and you've got no entertainment other than you can listen to one song and you have to pick between these two songs. Take Me Home, Country Roads, or Wagon Wheel. Which one are you picking?
So if it's just me locked in the room, country roads all day long, but If I could make Jester be locked in the room as well, my entertainment would be watching him getting tortured by playing Wagon Wheel on repeat. So that would be Wagon Wheel.
Okay. Okay, good answer. You get to the shelter, and you've got about 6 hours before it's bedtime, and there's a group there, and they've asked you to pick between that. You have to do a music circle, and they're only going to do one instrument for the next 6 hours. You have to pick which one it's going to be. Do you tell them you want a drum circle, or do you tell them you want a ukulele circle?
Drum circle, and I want to play.
Okay, all right. You get a choice to hike up Amicalola Falls again, or hike up Mount Everest. Which one are you doing?
Everest. I'll probably die.
Okay.
I would be one who died out there. You can use my shoes as a marker, but
Okay.
I'd try it.
All right. You never want to do Amicalola Falls again then. You have to hang out with one of these types of hikers. You have to pick one. A hiker that started the AT in January, or a hiker who starts a GoFundMe campaign to help them get out of Virginia in August.
Definitely the first, because maybe you can do something with that person and help them, but that second person, they're already so far off course. Like, they're lost. If they're GoFundMeing their vacation and started, yeah.
That's the most annoying type of hiker. And then last but least is tent or hammock.
Tent. I'm a ground dweller.
You've never done a hammock?
No, I like the privacy of my tent. And so if I was in a hammock, I would need a tarp that almost went to the ground and had doors on it. And there's just no point in doing that. Plus, I live in my Z-Pex duplex. And so for me to go to a hammock, I'd be increasing the weight. So
true.
I hang on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind either, but I'm a side sleeper, so I've fallen in love with the hammocks. And the other thing is, I don't know if you deal with this, but like when we get to campgrounds in the Whites, a lot of times, if I'm hiking on a weekend, it's super busy. So you can get to these campsites, and there's like 12 tent platforms and other sites, so they can fit 50, 60 people, but they may all be full. So then the caretaker will tell you, like, oh, you got to hike up another half mile to find like a overflow spot. If you have a hammock, you don't have to deal with that. So that's one of the other benefits that I like about it.
Yeah, we don't have anything like that. I mean, ours is we're hiking in the woods, so it can be challenging at times to find a place that isn't too rocky, and in certain sections that is level enough for a tent. So, but we can always make it work. And if not, I have a plan B.
True. That is true. And with that, we're going to roll out of here. I appreciate your patience coming back, and I will get this out and posted tonight.
Thanks for having me.